Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Scott Stedman podcast. I hope you are having a wonderful weekend. And joining me today is Micah Current. Micah, it's starting to become fall, starting to get a little colder.
I'm not convinced yet.
You feel like it's a ruse?
Well, usually in September, there's a couple of weeks where it's like in the 80s or, you know, it still feels like summer.
Yeah,
Um, and then we get to October and it's more steadily cool. Um, but yeah, I'm happy about that. I really am. So, um, in fact, I think as soon as we're done, I'm going to make a cup of hot tea and go sit on my porch.
yeah.
So, uh, it's what a time to be alive, right?
What a time to be alive. That's right.
I mean, we were talking about all
Um,
the crazy stuff that was going on before we hit record, and it was just like there's stuff that's in our country, there's stuff in government, I, I I also don't think I've ever remembered. Granted, my kid isn't in school yet, but like all of these things that you're hearing about schools,
mm,
about rules and about contracts and about um, just different things that you know we didn't hear of when we were in school. And
yeah.
uh, it's kind of just it's uh it's kind of scary when you think about it. And
Mm,
my wife is an alumni of University of South Carolina, and Sunday night I got a notification on my phone that there was an open shooter uh, in the library at the main campus at USC. And I'm like, what in the world is going on in our country? Um,
yeah.
so
It
anyway,
it's wild. Ugh. Um, well, today we're going to be talking about something that can be debatable, I think, depending on who you are and what type of church you go to. But we're going to talk a little bit about, is it ethical for families, members of the pastor to serve on leadership boards with the pastor? Um, and you know, it was one of those things that I think was kind of challenging, especially being in a small church for me, is that, you know, the last church I worked at, we had, our main big, our board of elders, our administrative team that kind of handles the business and the financial side of the church. But then we also have a variety of mission teams from like worship to um,
children
outreach, etc.
like children's ministry
Yeah, like
and
children's ministry, and one of the things I think is interesting is, like, if Laura was going to serve on one of the teams, like, she couldn't serve on the board of elders, but it was okay for her to serve like on the worship, like on the worship committee, to plan like the Christmas services and the Easter services, or maybe the outreach team. She could serve on those teams, but we didn't have her serve on like the administrative team or the board of elders because that wouldn't have been like okay, you know what I mean? So I think about other churches where not only do you have the pastor serving on, like, a main board, whether it's a trustees or their executive council or whatever, but then you also kind of have like, oh, the pastor's eldest son serving on there, or maybe the pastor's dad is serving on there. And, and it kind of breeds that fear of nepotism, and it kind of breeds that idea of, well, what happens when there's a vote on something important? You automatically know that probably the family member is going to stick with the pastor's point of view, so you already know that you have votes that are going to be more tilted toward that direction. Or what if you have two family members, or a family member that disagrees with the pastor, And how do you deal with this being about the church, and now this is becoming personal? So there's a lot of different factors going into it. So Micah, I guess in your experience, growing up in the church, but also working in a lot of different church settings, have you ever had the experience or witnessed the experience of family members of the minister serving on teams with the pastor itself?
Um, the last two churches that I was on staff in, I guess you can consider it a lot of nepotism. You use the word nepotism.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the first church, the lead pastor worked there. His wife was the executive director of ministries on staff. Their son was the worship pastor on staff. Their daughter sang on the worship team, but she wasn't on staff.
Mm.
And then the other church I worked in, the lead pastor was there, and then his wife was the family life pastor, and their son was the musical director on the worship team, and their daughter was almost indirectly on staff, but she wasn't, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But she led worship every week. She was on the worship team, XYZ. And I guess what I'll share in the illustration of the church I just mentioned, um, we started to notice this trend when when I was on staff there, that when Sunday mornings came around and there was the platform, we had the platform set up for worship and everything like that. There was always three of them
Mm.
on the stage at all times. And so like you couldn't always cover yourself, I guess, if that's the right term for it. Um, but it was awkward at times. And and it was almost like if there was ever an argument, if there was ever a uh, difference of opinion, and you got a vote or discussion on the particular topic that was being presented, you always were outnumbered because they always had at least three people on there at a time. The second church I mentioned, I'll say that it was more of a micromanaging thing and not so much like you had to worry about multiple family members at once. But like I just remember the the pastor's wife coming up. I was running lights one Sunday, and she was just looking over my shoulder, and I'm like, this is super awkward. You can't, you know, do what I need to do
Mm.
and do what you need me to do if you're going to be over my shoulder this whole time.
Yeah.
And there were some other things like, I mean, the lead pastor would always have, he very much did the Andy Stanley model
Okay.
uh, of slides and, um, a sentence per slide. And it was
Hmm.
black and white and the point was yellow or whatever.
Yeah.
And uh, it would drive me nuts because he would come up in between services and just add more and more slides. And he had like 100+ slides in
Yeah.
every message. And so it ended up just getting very hard for me to do my job. And the last thing I'll say about that is that their son, who was the worship pastor, it was basically his playground and he could do
Mm.
whatever he wanted. And they didn't stop him. They didn't tell him no. They didn't tell him, hey, maybe you should work on this with your team.
Oh,
Hey,
wow.
it was just, it was very uncomfortable.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
have you
Goodness.
have you had anything like that?
I have not. And, I think about all the churches that I grew up in and all the churches that I've been a part of. Within their bylaws, they always have a thing about how immediate family cannot serve on the same team. And it wasn't just pastor, but anybody, even church members. So if you have so if you have a husband serving on the administrative team, well, the wife or any of his kids can't serve on that same team. So that kind of, again, brought kind of more of the fairness to it, where I think things got a little tricky, especially in like your smaller, um, kind of like your smaller family oriented churches where you have nephews and nieces and cousins attending that church, was how far down do you go before you say, hey, they can serve on this team? Which, especially when your church is only, let's say, 50 people, and you still have, brothers and sisters and cousins and nephews and nieces and great uncles and great aunts, like where do you draw that line? Because you need these teams to kind of help serve in the church run, but at the same time, you also don't want to only pick the few people that A, are not related to each other to serve on the team, and B, if any of them leave or pass away or anything like that, like now you get into a challenge where now you have to really where you really have to like get everything together. And I think that's kind of makes it challenging. So I think they did immediate families, but like if you were a cousin or if you're a second cousin, then I think that was when it was okay for you to serve on the same team with a potential family member because you were two, at least a couple of generations removed, I guess. I don't know. But I never had that issue. But I know a lot of times reading books, especially when I was reading A Church Called Tove by Laura Branigan and Scott McKnight, um, whether we're talking a little bit about the stuff with Bill Hybels over at church and even some other churches where there's pastors who are abusing their power and whatnot. A lot of times when it came to, well, let's look at who the governance board was. And either A, you had people who probably were scared of the pastor, so they didn't say anything when there was things happening because, they didn't want to have to deal with the pastor's wrath because the pastor was very controlling. Or B, you found out that, oh, there was some family members that were serving on the board. So obviously, even if people wanted to react or say, hey, you can't do this or move in a way to discipline the pastor, it's kind of an uphill battle when at least maybe 50% or even more of the people who are serving on this committee are related to the minister, which means you can't get anything done. I think that was the case at the at Life Church here in New Albany, where there's that big scandal where their son was acting inappropriately with minors because the pastor and the pastor's husband and even the son served in leadership at the church, which means they were on the leadership board. And if you have three family members who are all related who are serving on the leadership board, then yeah, like maybe in some ways their vision helps kind of propel things because you can kind of steamroll through everything. But when it comes to accountability and discipline and addressing some wrong or some wrongdoing that's happening in the church or any accusations with the pastor or the pastor's family, then you kind of get into this mess where it's like, well, we can't do anything because if we take anything to a vote, we're always going to be voted down because the power's with the pastor and his family or her family too.
I mean, it's a very tricky road, right? Um, but you can also pastor a church and have family go to your church and not be involved at all, like
Yeah.
at those upper leadership levels, and that's perfectly fine. And it should be.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and knowing you and your personality when you were, a lead pastor, like you're more calm in nature, where you said something a few moments ago about a pastor just, losing, losing their mind because they just couldn't, control their temper or, you know, control the micromanaging. And so, all that to say that like there are ways to do things in ministry without jeopardizing yourself. Um, I will say about the one church I worked at that uh, it was the COVID year,
Mm-hmm.
so it was 2020, and we had I think 12 sounds right, 12 staff members total, and in 2020 alone, 5 or 6 resigned
Mm.
because they just couldn't handle the nepotism. And yet the family of the pastor was just completely clueless of it.
Yeah.
And in most cases, they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think kind of going back to the question or the topic of our message is this ethical? And in my opinion, I think it's unethical to have any, and not just the pastor, but if you have any close relatives serving on a board together, um, then that becomes very toxic and chaotic for a lot of things. And I can remember, and this is actually a little bit different, but I remember one of my professors who was a pastor at a small church out in wherever Ohio, pretty much like it was so small, I don't even know where it is. But they had a church that was attached to a graveyard, so they actually owned a graveyard, and apparently the somehow there was a family that actually owned the graveyard or owned the land that was the church was attached to that had the graveyard. And because of that, when the father or whatever died, the sons then were the ones who had to discuss the topic of the graveyard. And I think the church was in a financial spot, so they were trying to get to the point where they were going to see if they could sell the land or do something with the graveyard or something. I don't know. It was a very messy thing. But these two sons, who basically have the controlling ownership of this graveyard next to the church, had to be in these meetings. And man, it was a bloodbath. They were fighting, yelling. He said one person called his brother a snake. One guy just like cursed everybody out and left the room. And then at the end, the brother who remained goes, "Okay, well, why don't we go ahead and pray?" And it was like one of those things where the pastor's like, "I think we all need to leave and pray at our own homes about this situation." But it just kind of is a example of just like how sometimes having family members serving on the same team can be divisive when you're trying to make decisions and you feel like it's not fair or you don't have like a good well balanced because it's the majority is always going to go in the favor of the family that has the most members on the team. And B, it's also an issue when you have family members that are butting heads or fighting, then it doesn't become about church, about dealing with matters of the church. You're now trying to deal with personal, deep down issues between two family members, where now the pastor and the leadership team now has to kind of play counselor and mediator and not get any church business done because we have too many egos, hurting egos, battling against one another.
Well, it also
So
doesn't, it also doesn't help too that like, you know, people don't know what's going on at home with their family, and pastor's family is what I'm saying in this illustration. But I, I you don't know what's going on in their home. Uh, they could be arguing, they could be sniping at one another, they could not make up their mind in respect to um, personal matters, and then they take that baggage into the church with them.
yeah,
And then the baggage of the church, like you said, they end up playing counselor and um, what was the other word you said?
a mediator.
Yeah, you end up playing counselor and mediator because you have to resolve that problem, and then you're not getting anything done with church business, like you were saying.
Yeah. I mean,
It's
yeah, it's it's very messy. And I think if you are a church member and you're going to a church and you look at the leadership team and you realize, hey, this is not, this is unhealthy. Like this shouldn't be happening at all. And by that meaning that you look at like your leadership teams and you're realizing that, hey, there's a bunch of the pastor's family on there. And hey, I see like multiple family members serving on the same team. Like to me, I would say that would be a red flag. Like I would not go to a church where that's being tolerated. And there's been times where, as a pastor, when I've been candidating at churches and I go in for interviews and I'm looking at their bylaws, and there's sometimes where I'll look at these bylaws and I go, hey, curious, like, do you allow like family members to serve on the same like team, like on your trustees or on your elder board? And if they say, oh yeah, yeah, like husbands and wives can share on this team, then for me it's like, no, thank you. That doesn't work. I mean, there was one church I candidated at where literally I was interviewed at this church and to be their pastor, and I spoke that Sunday and had the interview with them with the board on Saturday. And then I came to the realization that, oh, the people who are interviewing me is the former pastor's wife whose husband passed away and her sons. And it's like, yeah, I don't want to be part of this church. I preached on Sunday, and if they wanted to give a vote or call me back or figure out what they want to do, but I never got a call back. Well, no, I take that back. I did get a call back. It was 3 months after, and at that point, it's like, no, no, thank you, I'm not interested anymore. But I mean, but even as a pastor, if you walk into a situation where you have multiple family members serving on your leadership team, how effective are you going to be to really make any change in a church when you can't even make any decisions because you have a bunch of one family making the decisions for you? And even though you can may offer suggestions, say, hey, we need to do this change, when it actually comes to vote time, you're always going to be voted down unless they want to partner with you and say, yeah, that's a great idea. But if there's any oppositions or any arguments or maybe a difference in vision about the direction the church is heading, you are always going to lose that battle because the family members are always going to vote for each other. And that's going to be difficult. So again, if you're going to a church and you see I have multiple families serving on the same ministry, my opinion is that is not a church that you need to be a part of, or it's a church that I would highly recommend if you want to have the battle. really push the issue saying, hey, I don't think this is a good idea to have family members of both the pastor, or even just in the congregation, just multiple family members serving on the same ministry team, especially if they're immediate family, because I don't see how that can kind of help make the church go forward if you're only having one family kind of dictate the direction of where the church is going.
It's exactly right. I agree with you 100% because it's like if I walked into a church and was candidating and interviewing for a position,
Mm-hmm.
and I realized that everybody who was interviewing me was all in the same family. No, absolutely not. Because like that's another thing, and I don't think we mentioned it, Scott, but like with things like that, where you have family members all on the same team or all on the same board or all on the same this, that, or the other, you can't get anything done because you're being micromanaged, because you're being observed. There's always somebody there watching you. And it's like, I might as well not even do this because I can't. Literally can't do it. My hands are tied.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. So, um, yeah, so friends, tell us what you think. Are you part of a church that has multiple family members serving on the team, and how is that experience going for you? Um, if you have any horror stories, and we would love to hear those, but even if you have any stories where it's like, hey, actually it does work pretty well and here's the reasons why, and you want to give us examples, we would like to know your thoughts. Feel free to email us at our website thscottstedman.com. Just hit email me, and we will go ahead and read those comments on air, or you can make a comment on the comment section both on our YouTube page or anywhere you are listening or watching this podcast. So, friends, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your weekend, and we'll be back on with another episode. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Scott Stedman Podcast. The Scott Stedman Podcast is made possible by support from our listeners. We thank listeners like Patty and Scott, whose support goes to this podcast's continual growth and maintenance. If you want to support this podcast, you can do so in a number of ways. First, feel free to give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed this episode and share it with your friends. If you'd like to financially support the Scott Stedman Podcast, you can go to the website ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman Podcast. That website again is ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman Podcast. Thank you so much for listening.